Today I'm reading the classic fairy tale, Hansel and Gretel. Near the borders of a large forest, there once lived a woodcutter and his wife who had two children, a boy named Hansel and his sister Gretel. The family was very poor and had little to live on, and once when there was a dreadful famine in the land, the woodcutter could not earn sufficient money to buy enough food for the family to eat. One evening after the children had gone to bed, the parents sat talking together about their troubles. The poor husband sighed and said to his wife, who was not the mother of his children, but the stepmother, "What will become of us? I cannot earn enough to support myself and you, much less the children. What shall we do with them so that they do not starve?" "I know what to do, husband," she replied. "Early tomorrow morning we will take the children for a walk across the forest and leave them in the thickest part. We will light a fire and give each one piece of bread. Then we will leave them alone. They will never find their way home again. You can be sure of that. And then we shall only have to work for ourselves." "No, wife," said the man, "that will never do. How could I find it in my heart to leave my children all alone in the forest, where the wild animals would come quickly and eat them?" "Oh, you fool," the wife said. "If you refuse to do this, you know we will all four die of hunger. You may as well go out and cut the wood for our coffins." And after this, she let him have no peace until he agreed with her plan. That night he could not sleep for hours, but lay thinking in sorrow about his children. The two children who were too hungry to sleep were also awake and heard all that their stepmother had said to their father. Poor little Gretel wept bitter tears as she listened and said to her brother, "What is going to happen to us, Hansel?" "Hush, Gretel," he whispered. "Don't be so unhappy. I know what we can do." Then they lay quite still until their parents were asleep. As soon as the house was quiet, Hansel got up, put on his little vest, unfastened the door, and slipped out. The moon was shining brightly, and the white pebble stones that lay outside the cottage door glistened like new silver money. Hansel swooped down and picked up as many of the pebbles as he could stuff into his little coat pockets. Then he went back to Gretel and said, "Don't worry, my little sister. Sleep in peace. Heaven will take care of us." Then Hansel laid himself down again in his bed and slept until morning came. As soon as the sun rose, the stepmother hurried to wake the two children and said, "Get up, you lazy bones, and come into the forest with me to gather wood for the fire." Then she gave each of them a piece of bread and said, "You must keep that to eat for your dinner, and don't quarrel over it or eat it too soon, for you will get nothing more." Gretel put both pieces of bread in her apron because Hansel's pockets were already full of white pebbles. Then the stepmother led them into the forest. They had gone but a short distance when Hansel stopped and turned to look back at the house, and this he did again and again. At last his stepmother said, "Why do you keep staying behind and looking back so?" "Oh, mother," said the boy, "I can see my little white cat sitting on the roof of the house, and I am sure she is crying for me." "Nonsense," she replied. "That is not your cat. It is just the morning sun shining on the chimney." But Hansel had seen no cat. He had stayed behind each time to drop a white pebble from his pocket on the path as they walked along. When they reached a thick and dark part of the forest, their stepmother said, "Come, children, gather some wood, and I will make a fire to warm you, for it is very cold here." Hansel and Gretel did as they were told, and soon made quite a high heap of brushwood. Their stepmother lit the pile of wood, and it blazed up into a bright fire. Then the woman said to them, "Sit down, children, and rest while I go find your father who is cutting wood in the forest. When we have finished our work, we will come and fetch you." Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire, and when noon arrived, they each ate the bread that their stepmother had given them for their meal. From deep in the forest, they heard the sound of strokes of an axe. The children felt safe, for they believed that their father was chopping wood nearby. But it was not the sound of an axe they heard. It was only the sound of a branch that will, okay, let me start over there. But it was not the sound of an axe they heard. It was only the sound of a branch that still hung on a withered tree and was moving up and down in the wind. Finally, after they had been sitting there a long time, the children began to grow tired. Their eyes began to close, and they soon fell fast asleep. When they awoke, it was dark night, and poor Gretel began to cry and said, "Oh, Hansel, now how shall we feed our... Oh, Hansel, how now..." Okay. When they awoke, it was dark night, and poor Gretel began to cry and said, "Oh, Hansel, now how shall we find our way out of the woods?" Hansel comforted his sister. "Don't be afraid," he said. "Let's just wait a little until the moon rises, and then we shall easily find our way home." Very soon the full moon rose, and Hansel took his little sister by the hand. The white pebbles, which glittered like bright coins in the moonlight, and which Hansel had dropped as he walked into the forest, showed them the way. They walked all night long and did not reach their father's house until the break of day. They knocked at the door, and when their stepmother opened it, she exclaimed, "Ah, you naughty children, why have you stayed out so long in the forest? We thought you were never coming back." But their father was overjoyed to see them, for it broke his heart to think that they had been left alone in the forest in the dark woods. Not long after this, there was another season of famine, and the children again heard their stepmother talking to their father at night after they were in bed. "The times are as bad as ever," she said. "We have just half a loaf of bread left, and when that is gone, we have no hope. The children must go away. We will take them deeper into the forest this time, and they will not be able to find their way home as they did before. It is the only way to save ourselves from starvation." But the husband felt heavy at heart, for he thought it was better to share his last morsel with his children. His wife would listen to nothing he said and continued to scold and argue with him. And because he had given in to her the first time, he could not refuse to do so now. The children were awake and heard the conversation. So as soon as their parents were asleep, Hansel got up. He wanted to go out and gather some more bright pebbles to drop as he walked to mark the way home. But his stepmother had locked the door, and he could not open it. When he went back to his bed, he again told his little sister not to fret, but to go to sleep in peace, for he was sure they would be taken care of. Early the next morning, the stepmother came and pulled the children out of bed, and when they were dressed, gave them each a piece of bread for their afternoon meal. Smaller pieces than they had been given before. Then they started on their way into the forest. As they walked, Hansel, who had the bread in his pockets, broke off little crumbs and stopped every now and then to drop one, turning around as if he were looking back at his home. "Hansel," said the stepmother, "what are you stopping for? Come along." "I saw my pigeon sitting on the roof and he wants to say goodbye to me," replied the boy. "Nonsense," she said. "That is not your pigeon. It is only the morning sun shining on the chimney." But Hansel did not look back anymore. He simply dropped pieces of bread behind him as they walked through the woods. This time they went on until they reached the thickest and densest part of the forest, where they had never been before in all their lives. Again, they gathered a great mound of brushwood, and the stepmother made a large fire. Then she said to them, "Stay here, children, and rest while I go to help your father who is cutting wood. When you feel tired, you can lie down and sleep for a while. We will come and fetch you in the evening when your father has finished his work." So the children remained alone. At midday, Gretel shared her piece of bread with Hansel, for he had scattered his own along the road as they walked. They slept for a while, and the evening passed, but no one came to fetch the poor children. When they awoke, it was still quite dark, and poor little Gretel was afraid. But Hansel comforted her, as he had done before, by telling her they only need to wait until the moon rose. "As you know, little sister, I've thrown breadcrumbs all along the path we traveled, and they will easily show us the way back home."